Okay, so welcome to the third module of Ed 590. Tonight we are going to focus on factors that influence student success. So to begin this, I'd like you to consider every factor that you can think of that impacts student success, and then go back and circle the three that you think are the most significant. And just hang on to this, and we're going to look back at this list when we get to the end of the module. So go ahead and pause the video for a minute and take a moment to do this. All right, and welcome back. So what does research say? There's been a lot of research on student success, of course, and some of the factors from the student side include their motivation, their abilities and learning styles, their backgrounds, sometimes culture, socioeconomic status, things on that level, and self-confidence. Of course, language abilities all have an impact on success in school. And things that from outside the school, including support provided to the student via their parents, coaches or community members, and educators, teachers, of course, and school counselors. And of course, learning environment as well. Is it encouraging? Is it engaging? And that can be in terms of the classroom, also in the school. So first we're going to take a look at school climate. And there's an article about a report that came out regarding school climate. And here's the link to it. It's also on the response sheet there. So pause the video for a minute and read, just kind of skim through here and get a sense of how does school climate have an effect on learning, and three factors that are impacted by school climate based on the article. So pause the video and take a moment to read that and then respond in the response sheet about that. And I will continue. And based on all the research, though, there's school climate, there's fancy things in schools, there's better or worse facilities issues. The most significant factor is the teacher. And this has been proven over and over again in myriads of studies in all different kinds of ways. So you really need to consider who you are as a teacher and what kind of impact you can have on student success. And of course, there's a lot of research that is looking at effectiveness, teacher effectiveness. The RAND Research on Education, the RAND Research Company is an independent company that researches different issues regarding education, and one thing they have found, of course, is that teachers matter more to student achievement than any other aspect of schooling, like services, facilities, and administration. Non-school factors, of course, have a huge influence on student success, but because we have no control over them, we can't really make a huge impact. Things we can do, like family nights, where we can engage families and support them in doing more with their kids at home, can be valuable. But we can control what happens in our classrooms. We can't control as much what happens outside. Although individual and family characteristics can have 4 to 8 times an impact on student achievement. Okay, so let's take a look then at what makes an effective teacher. Effective teachers establish clear expectations and follow them consistently. They are proactive versus reactive. So what this means is, rather than waiting for kids to behave in certain ways and reacting to it, we set up established classroom norms that are proactive. And we looked at that a lot when we were talking especially about behaviorism in regards to classroom management. Let me go back to the first one a little bit. Clear expectations and following them consistently. Again, looking back at some of the classroom management things we looked at in the last couple of weeks, being consistent is incredibly important. Being fair, of course, is important. We need to make sure there are effective, fair instructions that apply to all kids. And this is so important. It's important to all kids, but most kids, if they're feeling like they're treated unfairly, will say so. And so it's really we have to make sure that we are, if you're not going to follow through with something, don't set it up. And I found this as a teacher myself. It took really 5 years for me to find my sort of, what was my way of being in the classroom? What was I willing to do? What was I not willing to do? And I did a lot of observations of other teachers and thought they had some good ideas with management styles, but when I got to my own class, I realized I wasn't really willing to enforce those. So I had to discover really what was the line, what was I going to draw, and what was I willing to do. So that's something you're going to need to discover for yourself. Effective teachers have high expectations for kids and even higher expectations for ourselves. So we hold kids to a standard. We let them know that there's a high level, that we're not going to cut them slack for things. And we're also going to do the same for ourselves, that we hold ourselves to a higher standard. We create a positive environment. There is power in respecting our kids and genuine praise, which doesn't always mean saying good job, but it does mean finding something that we really feel that the student has done that is worth genuine and authentic praise. And it needs to be something that the student cares about. Nathaniel Branden, in the 6 pillars of self-esteem, talks about being psychologically visible. If we praise a student for something that they don't care about, it's not going to make any difference to them. So we need to make sure we're commenting on things that matter to them. This having the ability to ignore, we have to be careful of that. We can't just let things go by, but we also have to pick the battles that we think are significant. So we don't want, to be picky union and pick on every little thing that goes on in the classroom. On the other hand, we don't want to let big things go by. So we have to choose what's significant to focus on. Treating everyone as if they were good. In other words, not having a slanted eye. Sometimes teachers in the faculty lounge or teachers that had your kids in a previous year will say, oh yeah, watch out for that kid, he's problems. Well, you don't really want to hear that, and you don't want to know that. Start off the year with your own expectations, because oftentimes kids will respond to different teachers in different ways, and how they may have responded to Miss Smith the previous year will be different to how they respond to you. So assume that they are good, assume that, as most kids, want to be liked and want to do well, and treat them accordingly. Keeping test scores in perspective. There has been obviously a huge focus on test scores in the last 12 years in our public schools. And yes, test scores can be significant in terms of getting a sense of how a kid is doing overall, where they fit in the scheme of things, how is a school doing overall, but it's only one piece of a child's learning. So we want to make sure that we don't focus on test scores. And the problem with the high stakes testing is that the curriculum was narrowed so much because everybody was so concerned about testing, they taught to the test. That's changing, and I'm glad to see that it is, because our tests are becoming more broadly based and are more responsive to our kids, and we are less focused on teaching little picky details and more about teaching concepts and teaching kids how to critically think. So effective teachers have a plan and purpose for everything they do. So they're not random in the classroom, or at least not much. Sometimes being spontaneous can be fun, but for the most part, we want to be organized. We want to be purpose. Things are going in a direction to support kids' learning, to scaffold, to build background, to take them to a new level. So we want to be purposeful in what we do and how we do it. Okay, so there are 2 chapters taken from the excellent book Unshakable, 20 Ways to Enjoy Teaching Every Day, No Matter What, by Angela Watson. And I'd like you to pause here and read through the chapters. Now, when you go to Blackboard to download them, they are posted sideways. So if you hold your cursor at the top of the page, a little scroll bar will pop out, and you'll see this image here. If you click on that, that will turn the text. Now, one of them is upside down this way, so you'll have to click it so it turns all the way around. But then you'll be able to read them. Obviously, you can download and print them. I don't see why you would need to, but you can. So go ahead and read those, and then you can come back to this video. Okay, so if you're not done reading yet, keep reading. And here's some of the key points I wanted to mention. One, of course, is what are your goals for teaching? And, we can all think about why we went into teaching in the first place. And the funny thing is, these are the things that are not usually measured on standardized tests. A lot of times, though, we went into teaching for secondary because we love our content and we want to share that with kids and get excited, or we want to help kids be successful. And at the elementary, of course, it's the same. It's just oftentimes we're not usually focused on a specific content. It's more general than that. But the funny thing is, so I was English, and of course our kids had to take English assessments. And they pay us so kids do well on the test, but that's really, if you talk to kids or you talk to parents about why particular teachers were good, they wouldn't say it's because they helped them get good test scores. So there's a little paradox there. So I want you to think about a vision based on your goals and use that to measure your success. And create a shared vision for your class. So with your students, you can create a vision together. What is your vision for the school year or for a particular unit of study? And refer to that often. So you say, okay, our vision was to do this. Are we still on task? Are we still going where we wanted to go? And one thing that I think is really important is to celebrate your successes. And you can even do this daily. And this can be as simple at the end of the day for yourself. Kind of just do one thing I did well today, and do a list of 5 things you did well, or something that worked well, or sometimes you got through the day. Sometimes you're just not feeling great, or you're tired, or the kids were squirrely. It happens, and hey, you made it. So give yourself a pat on the back on a regular basis, and you can also do that with your students. Take some time as a group to say, hey, what did we do well this period? What worked well for us? And what didn't? What can we learn from what didn't work well? So that can also be something important too. A few other things to think about is reflecting often and making changes based on your reflections. And part of what I think I like about this program, especially like during your student teaching process, where you're reflecting daily on what worked, what didn't work, how it's going. So that can be significant. And also getting student input, maybe informal, mid-course, mid-term, mid-progress reports, and just get some feedback. Hey, what's going well? What do we still need to work on? Getting some feedback from your students. Of course, being open to change, being proactive, not reactive. So seeing that technology was becoming a bigger deal, I have over the course of the years increased my ability to use technology. So teaching this online class hasn't been a huge shock to the system. I'm already familiar with Blackboard. I learned how to use the screencasting Camtasia. I have played with different tools that can be used, like the Padlet, which I'm finding I'm really liking. So being aware of what's coming down the pike and being responsive to it. So being easy with the mistakes. If you think about the FIRE element and 5 elements of effective thinking, of course, they even talk about making mistakes on purpose. So that could even be something you can play with as in your classroom with your kids. Experimenting with things and doing it wrong purposely until you can find different right ways of doing it. I like Watson's quote here, innovate and subvert the system quietly. There was a great book written in the 60s called Teaching as a Subversive Activity. And I like the message that when there are rules that come down the pike, you still are responsible for who you are and how you teach. And the nice thing about teaching a lot of times is you can close the door and it's you and the kids. So she talks about, I think in the chapter where they were required to do 3 math worksheets every day. And without making a big stink about it, she just didn't. She taught math the way she thought was significant. She did have kids doing some practice in that workbook, but she certainly didn't have them doing 3 a day. And her kids were doing terrific, and no one gave her any grief about it. Finally, of course, what should drive your classroom decisions, what should be driving school decisions, what should be driving policy, is the question, is this good for students? And oftentimes we get lost in that, but that should be the bottom line always. So those are some of the key things to think about in terms of student success. Next, we will take a look at classroom factors that can support success.